You wake up at 3 a.m., you cannot move, you cannot scream. There is a crushing weight sitting on your chest. You think it's a demon, but what if that heavy, suffocating shadow isn't a monster? What if it's just your credit card debt, your endless emails, and the terrifying realization that you are trapped in a life you can't afford to escape? Welcome to the debate. If you're listening to this and you've, ever experienced that exact crushing weight, you know perfectly well the sheer, visceral terror of being betrayed by your own body in the middle of the night.
Oh, absolutely. It's terrifying.
Right? And historically, human beings have always tried to put a face on this terror. For centuries, across, countless cultures, we blamed these horrific night-waking experiences on the supernatural. Folklore is just full of the old hag who sits on your chest to steal your breath, or
Incubi, nocturnal demons creeping out of the dark corners.
Exactly. Though what we are analyzing today is the modern sociological and psychological reality of this phenomenon. The central question we are putting on the table is this: is the modern sleep paralysis demon actually the ultimate physical manifestation of hyper-capitalist burnout? I argue that it absolutely is. I mean, this is no longer about ghosts or goblins. It is the literal, physical embodiment of a societal pathology.
Well, the historical context you brought up is really fascinating because it proves just how deeply hardwired this experience is in the human nervous system. We are dealing with an ancient biological phenomenon, but you are bringing a radically new psychological framing to it. And I come at it from a different way. While I agree that the flavor of our modern nightmares has changed, we cannot ignore the fundamental biology of what is actually happening in the brain. So I will argue today that this paralysis is not simply the body breaking down under the weight of modern stress. It is actually a desperate, violent biological attempt to force an overactive mind to stop working.
I think we need to dive right into the mechanics of that, honestly, because the line between our biology and our sociology is completely blurring here.
Yeah, it really is.
The source material highlights a chilling pattern in contemporary cases of sleep paralysis. The mind wakes up in a state of absolute panic. It's spinning about survival, about the mortgage, about an endless barrage of emails. But the body is so severely, chronically burned out that it essentially chooses paralysis over facing another day of the daily grind.
Wait, let me stop you right there. Because framing it as the body, choosing to give up, that is where we diverge. We have to explain how this actually works under the hood.
Okay, go for it.
So during REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, which is when we have our most vivid dreams, your brainstem releases neurotransmitters, specifically GABA and glycine. These chemicals essentially switch off the motor neurons in your spinal cord, so you are chemically paralyzed.
Right, which is an evolutionary safeguard so we don't physically act out our dreams and, say, run out of a cave and off a cliff.
Exactly. Now, sleep paralysis happens when there's a glitch in the timing. You regain waking consciousness, but that chemical switch in the brainstem hasn't been flipped back to on yet.
So you're awake but offline.
Right. Your motor cortex is sending signals to move your arms, but the connection is severed. Now, here is where the stress comes in. Why does this happen more frequently now? It comes down to, cortisol and adrenaline.
The stress hormones.
Exactly. When you are living in a state of chronic, low-grade panic worrying about debt, job security, constant connectivity, your stress hormones are perpetually elevated. This disrupts your entire sleep architecture. You are yanked out of REM sleep abruptly by these stress spikes, catching the brain off guard before it can clear the paralyzing neurotransmitters.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand the mechanics of the hallucination itself. My mind wakes up, maybe I'm sweating over a Slack notification I got at 9 p.m., and I realize I can't move.
Right.
Why do I immediately see a monster in the corner of the room? Why not just feel temporarily stuck?
Because of how your amygdala functions. The amygdala is the threat detection center of the brain. You wake up, you are completely vulnerable, and your brain realizes it has lost control of the body.
So it freaks out.
The amygdala absolutely panics. It flags this profound vulnerability as an imminent life-threatening danger. Because there is no actual predator in the room, the brain has to invent a narrative to explain why you are paralyzed and terrified.
Wow.
It projects a hallucination into the physical space. In ancient times, the amygdala pulled from a library of natural fears, right? A leopard, a rival tribe. In the Middle Ages, it pulled from religious dogma, like demons. Today, what is our greatest existential threat? It is abstract. It is poverty, failure, the loss of agency.
And that right there is exactly why I argued this is a system failure caused by our environment. I mean, the amygdala is overreacting because we live in an environment that demands our nervous systems be on high alert 24/7.
Well, sure, but
Think of the modern worker's brain like a computer's task manager. We have dozens of heavy memory-draining background applications running at all times. The credit card debt app is running. The unread emails app is running. The social media comparison app is running.
yeah, the CPU is completely maxed out.
Overheating, constantly processing existential dread. What happens during sleep paralysis is essentially a hard reboot. The system completely freezes and crashes under the unbearable weight of capitalist demands. The crushing weight people feel on their chest isn't just a biological glitch. It is the literal, quantified realization that the machine is broken, and yet the society we live in demands that it keep running.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are still framing the paralysis as a catastrophic breakdown, like a failure of the human hardware. But the crushing weight isn't a crash. It is a deliberate, protective lockdown initiated by the operating system.
Protective? How is that protective?
The true horror of sleep paralysis in the 21st century isn't the physical sensation of the weight. The horror stems from the modern ego's absolute inability to accept a loss of productivity and control.
How do you mean?
We have been conditioned from birth to equate our physical mobility and our constant doing with our actual human worth. We believe that to be immobile is to be useless, and to be useless is to die.
Wow, okay. Yeah.
So, when the body intervenes and says, no, you must stay perfectly still, you must recover, the capitalist-trained ego interprets that mandated rest as a literal attack. The demon sitting on your chest isn't capitalism crushing you. It's your own ego, absolutely terrified of the fact that it is being forced to do nothing.
I mean, that interpretation glosses over a really profound disconnect between the mind and the body that suffers report, which is one of the most chilling observations we have.
What disconnect?
The mind wakes up instantly panicking over the future. It's agonizing over the inbox, over economic survival. But the exhausted body refuses to move. This is the ultimate tragedy of the hyper-capitalist condition.
Yeah, but
We have created a state of being where even in the sanctuary of rest, the mind is agonizing over its economic output, while the physical form is too traumatized by chronic stress to even participate in the panic. Capitalism demands that the mind and body act in unified service to productivity. In sleep paralysis, we are seeing the body stage a mutiny against a mind that has been completely co-opted by economic anxiety.
that's a compelling argument. But have you considered that this exact disconnect, this mutiny, as you call it, is precisely what saves us?
Saves us from what?
You call it a tragedy. I call it a vital evolutionary adaptation deployed against a highly toxic environment. Think about what the mind is actually trying to do in that moment. It wakes up at 3 in the morning, flooded with cortisol, and its immediate impulse is to keep working.
Right, to check the phone.
It wants to physically grab the phone on the nightstand. It wants to start pacing the floor, strategizing about debt, re-entering the cycle of stress. The mind is compromised. It is addicted to the stress cycle.
So the body steps in as the adult in the room.
Exactly. The body possesses a deeper, more ancient biological wisdom. It recognizes this toxic cognitive loop. It deploys REM atonia not as a glitch and not as a crash, but as an emergency brake.
An emergency brake.
Yes. The body realizes that if it allows the mind to have physical autonomy in that state of heightened cortisol and adrenaline, the organism will literally destroy itself through exhaustion. The hallucination of the demon is just the conscious mind's way of rationalizing why it is suddenly not allowed to work. The mind is so hooked on the grind that it views the body's refusal to participate as an act of demonic hostility.
But let's step back and look at the historical context of that grind, because it wasn't always this way. If we look back before the Industrial Revolution, human sleep patterns were completely different. People generally experienced biphasic sleep,
Right.
They slept for a few hours, woke up in the middle of the night for an hour or two to read, talk, or stoke the fire, and then went back to sleep. There was a natural rhythm to nocturnal wakefulness.
Right, and then the factories were built.
Exactly. The Industrial Revolution came along, and factory owners needed workers to be alert for 12 to 14-hour continuous shifts. So society essentially consolidated sleep. We compressed a natural flowing biological rhythm into an unbroken, mandatory 8-hour block solely to maximize labor efficiency. We broke our own natural sleep architecture to serve an economic model.
Which perfectly supports my point, honestly. We broke the architecture, and now the biology is fighting back against the economic model.
But at what cost? I mean, if this so-called emergency brake manifests as an experience so psychologically agonizing that people dread falling asleep, then we are discussing a sickness.
A sickness of the environment.
Make no mistake, this is a pathology bred by a society that systematically suffocates its people. We are talking about human beings whose waking hours are characterized by chronic stress, existential dread, and an inescapable sense of being trapped.
Right.
If their sleep, the one biological imperative meant to provide refuge and restoration, becomes a literal torture chamber that perfectly mimics the dread of their waking life, then the paralysis is the ultimate sign of defeat.
Defeat by whom?
Defeat by the system. It means the societal expectations haven't just influenced our waking behavior, they have successfully colonized our unconscious.
Meaning what, practically?
Meaning, we've let our bosses and our bank accounts literally invade our dreams. The hyper-capitalist state has penetrated the very architecture of our rest, turning the sanctuary of sleep into a theater of economic horror.
Oh, come on.
You wake up and you literally feel the weight of your debt pressing the air out of your lungs. The shadow in the corner is the oppressor, and the sufferer's complete inability to fight back, to even scream for help, is the final admission that the system has won. We are paralyzed in life, and so we become paralyzed in bed.
No, I have to push back hard on that framing. You were looking at the paralysis as the pathology, when in fact the waking life is the sickness. The paralysis is the cure.
A cure? That feels like you're being suffocated by a demon?
Yes, because the endless cycle of labor, the chronic stress, the artificial demands of constant connectivity, the phone vibrating next to your head at midnight, that is the disease. Is sleep paralysis terrifying? Yes, viscerally so.
Very.
But is it a disease, or is it the only defense mechanism keeping the modern worker from working themselves to actual death? We have constructed a society that aggressively forbids rest. It penalizes stillness.
True.
It equates human worth with relentless, unbroken productivity. In an environment that hostile to basic biological needs, the body cannot simply ask politely for a break.
So it takes the mind hostage.
It has to. It must mandate the break. It must incapacitate the host. I challenge you to view this terrifying shadow not as the oppressor, but as the only force powerful enough to mandate rest in a society that strictly forbids it. The demon is not the capitalist system. The demon is the fierce, uncompromising guardian of the exhausted physical form, violently restraining the mind from running the organism into the ground.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective to summarize my stance. We cannot romanticize an experience that leaves individuals paralyzed with raw terror.
I wouldn't say I'm romanticizing it.
Whether it is a biological emergency brake or a catastrophic system failure, the shadow sitting on the chest remains a terrifying reflection of our modern existence. It is the crushing, inescapable weight of our own lives. It is the debt that cannot be paid, the chronic stress that cannot be managed, and the societal expectations that demand far more than the human frame can endure.
Fair point.
The real tragedy here remains that our deepest fears no longer stem from the dark woods outside our caves, but from the very economic structures we built to sustain ourselves.
My view remains that this paralysis is a dark, necessary biological intervention. The phenomenon is undeniably harrowing, but it is serving a critical purpose. The demon we hallucinate is the fierce protector of the exhausted body. It is violently forcing the co-opted, overstimulated mind to halt its endless capitalist panic. It is a radical, physiological rebellion against an entirely unsustainable way of living.
Well, what we have established here today is the profound value of analyzing these intensely personal physiological experiences through a sociological lens. When we unpack the mechanics of the brain and cross-reference them with the demons we hallucinate, we reveal the terrifying realities of the economic systems that deeply penetrate our subconscious.
There is undoubtedly much more to explore regarding how modern stressors and the architecture of our society actively hijack and interact with our basic biological functions. The dialogue between our ancient biology and our modern economy is far from settled, and it's playing out every single night.
Tonight, when you go to sleep, ask yourself, if the shadow visits you, is it trying to kill you, or is it the only thing forcing you to finally rest?